The story is set in 1987, when a civil war between South Sudan and North Sudan engulfed the region. In a small village in Bahr el Ghazal town, South Sudan, 3 children named Theo, Mamer, and Abatal lived together as siblings. One afternoon, while Theo and Mamer were playing, suddenly a horde of military came and destroyed the village and killed everyone there. Theo, Mamer, Abatal, and their friends ran to save themselves from the pursuit of the indiscriminate military horde. As a result of the attack, all the villagers died, and only 6 children survived, namely Theo, Mamer, Abatal, Daniel, Gabriel, and Simon. With very bad conditions, the 5 children appointed Theo as leader and would follow what Theo did. There, Theo only remembered the message of his father, who was a tribal chief in his village. His father suggested that they walk in the direction of the rising sun to reach the country of Ethiopia, because Ethiopia is a safe country. The next morning, Theo led the way to Ethiopia without any supplies. When they were hungry, they found a deer being eaten by a cheetah. Those who were very hungry immediately chased the cheetah away and took the deer's carcass to eat. For days they had been walking on the desert, and the distance they had traveled had reached 418 kilometers. There was no water, no food, and they were physically exhausted. One afternoon, while they were resting, Simon died of thirst and hunger. Theo, who saw this, then urinated in a container and drank the urine with the other children. Although it tasted very bad, there was no choice for them to survive. After 3 months, they met a group of people who were also fleeing. One of the people in the group explained to Theo that the Ethiopian border was guarded by troops and no one could enter Ethiopia. So they decided to go to Kenya. Among the group of people were 2 orphans named Jeremiah and his brother Paul. They walked and decided to go to Kenya together. It's been 5 months since they walked through the desert, and now the condition of the refugees looks very poor. They were stricken with various diseases and also starvation, so many of them died. One day the refugees were very happy because they found a river and immediately drank as much as they could. There, Theo found a bullet near the river. Theo thought that the riverbank area was too dangerous. Theo asked Mamer, Abatal, Daniel, Gabriel, Jeremiah, and Paul to make a rope so they could cross the river. Theo's guess turned out to be correct. As they were making the rope, the refugees who had already walked over were shot, and their bodies were washed into the river. After the rope for crossing was finished, Theo crossed first to hook the rope across the river. However, when Mamer, Abatal, Daniel, Jeremiah, and Paulus had crossed the river, Gabriel did not dare to jump into the river because he could not swim. So Gabriel had to be shot and died there. They also cried seeing Gabriel lying in that place. They continued their journey through the destroyed village. In the village, they met a man who was very badly injured. The man showed them the way to Kenya. At night, while crossing a meadow, Mamer asked Theo to rest because Daniel's health condition was deteriorating. Eventually, they slept in the meadow. In the morning, when Mamer woke up, she was discovered by soldiers patrolling the area. Knowing this, Theo hid his brothers and told the soldier that he was alone because he was separated from his group. Theo truly became a hero for his brothers because he was willing to sacrifice for his brothers to stay alive. After resuming the journey, Mamer continued to cry because she felt guilty for getting Theo caught. Abatal, who saw this, then told Mamer that Theo had given life to you. So don't cry because now you are the leader for us. After that, the journey resumed, and the distance they had traveled had now reached 1263 km. Daniel's deteriorating condition forced Mamer to continue carrying him. A few days later, they arrived at a refugee camp in Kenya. There, they received food and clothes. However, because Daniel's condition was so bad, he eventually died. 13 years later, Mamer, Abatal, Jeremiah, and Paul were seen praying at Daniel's grave. Afterwards, Mamer went to the care center for refugees to help the doctor there. Meanwhile, Jeremiah is now a pastor in the refugee camp. The Sudanese conflict turned out to be a concern for the UN. So in 2001, the UN resettled 3,600 refugees to various countries, including America. That afternoon, the names Mamer, Abatal, Paul, and Jeremiah were on the list of refugees to be resettled to America. Hearing the news, they were very happy because they would soon meet a better life. In preparation for moving to America, the refugees were provided with knowledge about the country. They were also required to work there because they had to reimburse the American government for the transportation from Sudan to America. After everything was done, they got ready to leave the refugee camp that had raised them for 13 years. They boarded a plane to America and left the refugee camp. By the spring of 2001, they had arrived in America and were seen at the airport being picked up by the people who would take them to their destination city. The American government placed Mamer, Jeremiah, and Paul in Kansas City, while Abatal herself would be placed in Boston. Mamer, Jeremiah, and Paul, knowing that Abatal would not be staying with them, objected. so they asked the immigration authorities to place Abatal in Kansas City. However, their efforts were in vain as there were no families in Kansas willing to take in a female refugee. With a heavy heart, they had to part with Abatal at the airport. They sadly embraced each other. After parting with Abatal, they flew to Kansas and were picked up by a woman named Carrie. Carrie explained to Mamir, Paul, and Jeremiah that she was an agent who would find jobs for them in America. After getting acquainted with Carrie, they were taken by Carrie to the place where they lived. Arriving at the house, they were greeted by a woman named Pamela Lowy, who is a volunteer who finds housing for refugees in Kansas City. After meeting with Lowy, Carrie promised that tomorrow she would contact them to find a job. After Carrie left, Lowy explained the furniture in each room of the house. Seeing the luxury they had, Mamir, Jeremiah, and Paulus remembered Abatal. Mamir also asked Lowy to move Abatal to where they lived. However, Lowy explained that it was impossible because there were no families in Kansas who would accept women. Hearing the explanation from Lowy, they immediately fell silent. That night, since they were not used to sleeping in a bed, they spread a mattress on the floor and slept together. In the morning, they stood in front of the window looking out at the yard, waiting for Carrie to arrive. Meanwhile, the phone at home kept ringing because Carrie was calling her, but they assumed it was just an alarm going off. Annoyed that the phone wasn't picked up, Carrie finally came to their house. After that, Carrie invited them to look for work, and the place Carrie visited was a restaurant. Then there, Carrie introduced Mamir, Jeremiah, and Paulus to the owner of the restaurant named Matt. Carrie interviewed them, but because they had no work experience, Mamir, Jeremiah, and Paul were not hired. Knowing that their job interviews were terrible, Carrie took them to her friend Jack. At Jack's house, they were taught how to interview well so that someone would accept them to work. A few days later, after learning how to interview with Jack, Mamir and Jeremiah were hired as waitresses at a convenience store, while Paul himself was hired at a sprayer assembly plant. In the evening, since they had found jobs as a thanksgiving to God, they celebrated by buying a pizza and laughing together, telling the story of their first day at work. The next day, Mamir, armed with a map, went to Carrie's house to thank her for finding her a job. As the days went on, Mamir, who had always wanted to study in America, managed to get into a school. However, due to the expensive tuition fees, Mamir ended up having to look for additional work, and she was accepted as a security guard at a company. Meanwhile, at the factory, Paulus became a skilled employee with his fast-paced work. However, because he was too diligent, two of Paul's friends disliked him, and when he was taking a break, they gave him marijuana, and Paul became very fond of marijuana. Meanwhile, Jeremiah, who had finished his work, was told to dispose of fruits and vegetables that were no longer fit for sale. But while in the trash, he saw a woman who was looking for food in the trash. Seeing that, Jeremiah felt sorry for her and gave her the food he was going to throw away. However, Jeremiah's kindness was known by his boss, so his boss scolded Jeremiah. Seeing the stingy nature of his boss, Jeremiah immediately decided to stop working there. Carrie, who found out that Jeremiah had quit his job, then asked him the reason why Jeremiah quit his job. Jeremiah replied that he couldn't work if the job didn't suit his conscience. However, Carrie explained that in America, Jeremiah needed money to live, and that money was earned by working. As an employee, Jeremiah must have a boss, and Jeremiah only needs to do what his boss tells him to do, even though sometimes the boss acts like an asshole. Hearing that, Jeremiah smiled and told Carrie that he still had faith. After that, Jeremiah went to look for job vacancies, and at that time he met Jack. Then Jack took Jeremiah to work at a church. One day, as they were paying for their passage from Sudan to America, they were informed by the receptionist that the program to resettle refugees from Sudan to America had been discontinued, as Sudan was considered a country that had supported terrorism in America. Later that evening, while Mamir was doing her schoolwork, Paul came home under the influence of marijuana. Seeing this, Jeremiah asked Paul about his red eyes. Seeing Paul's condition, Mamir wanted to check Paul's eyes, but Paul refused Mamir's help and insulted Mamir that she was not a doctor. After that, Paul, who was drunk, became angry with himself and left the house. Mamir and Jeremiah, who were surprised by Paul's change in attitude, then called Carrie to come to the house. After Carrie arrived at Jeremiah and Mamir's house, they told her about Paul's change in attitude. After telling them about Paul's change in attitude, Mamir told them about Abatal, who was now in Boston. At the same time, Paul was on the street calling Abatal on a payphone. However, because the phone didn't connect, Paul got upset and broke the payphone. As a result of his actions, Paul was taken to the police station. After that, Carrie, Mamir, and Jeremiah helped get Paulus out of the police station. However, after getting out, Paul made another problem where he told Mamir that Mamir should be dead and Theo was here. Because Paul continued to bring up the issue of Theo's death, Mamir finally felt angry and was forced to hit Paulus. After the fight, Mimir felt guilty for making Theo die. Then she went to Jack's cowshed and recalled the good times with Theo. Seeing Mimir in a very chaotic state, Jack invited Mimir into the house. Inside the house, while crying, Mimir told the story of Theo's death. Hearing that, Jack told Mimir that life is sometimes not what we want, but life is a choice, and Theo has chosen to let you live. So Mimir's job now is just to live life to the best of her ability and not disappoint Theo, who was willing to sacrifice for her. After calming down, Mimir fell asleep at Jack's house. In the morning, Carrie, Jeremiah, and Paul came to Jack's house to meet Mimir, and here Paul also apologized to Mimir, and finally they both reconciled. One night, Carrie searched the internet for information about the conflict in Sudan. In that search, Carrie saw photos of civilians in Sudan who were so miserable due to the conflict. After that, Carrie remembered Mimir, Jeremiah, and Paul, and she also remembered their brother named Abatal, who was now separated in the city of Boston. The next morning, Carrie went to the immigration office and asked the supervisor there to move Abatal to Kansas City. However, the supervisor said that it was very difficult because in Kansas there were no families willing to accept female refugees. As a solution, the supervisor told Carrie to find a family that would accept Abatal in Kansas City. After returning from the immigration office, Carrie asked Loie for help to move Abatal from Boston to Kansas, and Carrie explained to Loie that in Kansas, Abatal would live in her house. One night when Mimir, Jeremiah, Paul, and Loie were preparing for the Christmas party, Carrie unexpectedly gave them a surprise, namely Abatal. They were happy and hugged her immediately. After that, they celebrated Christmas together with great joy. In the morning, while Mimir was doing the laundry, Abatal said that while in Boston she received a letter from a refugee camp in Kenya, in which the contents of the letter informed her that there was a man who came to the refugee camp looking for them. After reading the letter, Mimir felt sure that the man who came to the refugee camp and was looking for her was Theo. In the afternoon, accompanied by Jack and Carrie, Mimir met with the immigration supervisor and he asked the supervisor to move Theo to America. However, the supervisor said that flight activities from the refugee camp in Kenya had been stopped for now because Sudan was suspected of sponsoring acts of terrorism in America. Hearing this answer, Mimir was disappointed. However, because he missed Theo so much, Mimir finally went to the refugee camp in Kenya to meet Theo, the person who had saved his life. Arriving at the refugee camp, Mimir immediately went to the administration to look for a refugee named Theo. However, it turned out that Theo's name was not found, so he had to look for Theo by asking the refugees there. For almost 2 days, Mimir searched for Theo, but the search was fruitless because the refugee camp was inhabited by 100,000 people, and Mimir could not recognize Theo's face. When Mimir was almost desperate, she played a childhood game with Theo, and when Theo unexpectedly came to see her, they hugged each other. At that time, Mimir told Theo that he was going to the American Embassy office in Kenya to take care of Theo's move to America, and before leaving, he checked Theo's health condition. However, when Theo took off his shirt, Mimir was shocked to see so many wounds on Theo's back. Arriving at the U.S. Embassy, Mimir was unable to get Theo's letter of permission to move to America. So not wanting to disappoint Theo, Mimir told Theo that Theo's letter of permission to move to America had been approved, and Theo would be moving to America soon. The next day, Mimir and Theo went to the airport, and there Mimir finally told Theo the truth that she had failed to get Theo's letter of permission to move to America. And instead, Mimir gave all his identity papers to Theo so that Theo could go to America. Hearing Mimir's confession, Theo refused to go to America. However, Mimir reminded Theo that Theo had once provided a life for her, and now Mimir wanted to return the favor a little for what Theo had given her. Because Mimir kept insisting, Theo finally went to America. While Theo was on his way, Mimir called Carrie and asked Carrie to pick Theo up at the airport. After a long journey, Theo finally arrived at the airport, where he was picked up by Jeremiah, Paul, and Abatal. Despite having to live in a refugee camp by herself, Mimir was still happy because she had given Theo a better life. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the Amri Film channel so you don't miss the next movie recaps.